The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. I was alone in the library. I had been alone for hours. It wasn't unusual for me to stay late. Studying for my exams, I didn't mind the solitude. A book fell from a shelf and landed on the table with a thud. I jumped slightly and then forced myself to look away, back down at my notes. Surely it was just mice. Old buildings made a lot of noise sometimes. In fact, I preferred it. The hushed silence of the library after closing hours was comforting. What I needed was a hot cup of tea, something to take the edge off the ever-increasing feeling of dread that had been settling in my stomach. The pages themselves were yellowed and brittle, their edges crumbling at my touch. I found a small hole hidden behind a heavy tome. I pushed aside the book and peered inside. The hole gaped open like a black tooth in the darkness. I felt a sudden urge to crawl through it. It was as though something was beckoning to me from the other side. I told myself it was stupid to be scared. There was a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything that had happened so far. The floorboards, the book, the temperature change. As the book hit the floor, more books followed, tumbling over one another until they formed a small mountain at my feet. I stared at the pile, unsure of what to do next. Then I remembered the flashlight in my bag. I rummaged through the books and pulled it out, its beam cutting through the darkness. They were all simply the result of an old building settling at night. But the shadow in the corner, it was different. I turned the light off and ran from the library, not daring to look back. A human shape lay on the other side, almost like a person lying on a shelf. My breath caught in my throat. The face was white and gaunt, its eyes hollow and staring. I could see the outline of a mouth, but no lips. It was like looking into the abyss of space, infinite and utterly terrifying. I couldn't make out any details, only the faint outline of what looked like a man. The ghost of the man in the hole, whatever it was, had turned its head and was staring directly at me. Its eyes, pits of nothingness, seemed to bore into my very soul. But I can tell you this, whatever I saw in that library was real. I don't remember how long we stared at each other like that, but it must have been seconds. He was hunched over as if peering into the darkness, his head resting on something that looked like a stack of books. The kettle screamed as it boiled, momentarily drowning out the scratching noises coming from somewhere above me. I poured the boiling water into a mug, wrapped my hands around it, closed my eyes, and took a sip. A cold draft of air brushed against my neck, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. Something was definitely up here in this library, something other than mice. I could feel its presence now, a dark, oppressive weight pressing down on me. And it was getting closer. I heard a floorboard creak above me. I looked up from my notes and listened intently. I felt a sudden drop in temperature, but I didn't dare turn on the light to check. When I opened my eyes again, I noticed a shadow in the corner of the room. I got up from my chair and walked slowly towards the corner. As I approached, the shadow seemed to grow larger. I reached out a trembling hand to touch it, but when my fingers made contact with the wall, the shadow vanished. I pressed my palm against the cool stone and tried to calm my racing heart. I told myself it was just a trick of the light. Then I felt it. I ran my fingers along the top of the bookshelf, my fingertips trailing over the spines of the ancient books. But before I could make a decision, a book tumbled out of the hole and landed at my feet. I jumped back in surprise. As I shone the light into the hole, I saw it. Cautiously, I moved the books aside, revealing the face that lay beneath. And then he looked up. I stumbled backwards, knocking over my chair. Then, just as abruptly as he had appeared, he was gone. Now, sitting here in the safety of my own room, I can still feel his eyes on me. I know what some will say, it was just a dream.